Hello, listeners, and welcome to Privacy Chats with Rachel and John, a podcast for privacy professionals and enthusiasts alike. I'm Rachel.
And I'm John. We are the hosts of Privacy Chats. And today we're going to look into the balance between privacy and functionality a little bit.
Yeah, your title for this episode is interesting. You call this one the balancing act. Have we gone too far? What are we talking about today?
So I've been thinking about this for a while, and like as privacy professionals, we both advocate for strong and stringent privacy practices. We're now 20 episodes into this endeavor together on Privacy Chats. We've talked about a lot of different aspects of privacy, generally advocating for stronger privacy. But maybe we need to think something about that.
Interesting, and I would say we have. And speaking of, happy 20th episode. Could
Congrats.
be 20. I feel like there's a but following what you just said. You were alluding to that. Do you think we've gone too far for privacy?
So not necessarily. Maybe, I guess it depends. I don't think that you and I have gone too far. I think that we tried to take a balanced approach to privacy. We tried to look at it from different perspectives. In our last episode about password security, we talked. We recognized that one aspect of that was that you need to recognize the behaviors of people, and not just create rules because of cybersecurity professionals say that you should. So
yeah. So who's going too far then?
So this one's going to be a little bit nuanced and wishy-washy. Like people themselves, the privacy industry regulators.
So everyone's wrong except for us.
Yes, right. So so here's the thing. I think that all of us look at privacy from the perspective of what is now, rather than from the perspective of what it could be. And that's I think that's why it's difficult to talk about this in a very firm and strong way. So let's use an analogy. I love analogies. So remember, a lot of us have heard stories from the early days of the automobile industry, when there was rules that, when we look at them today, they just seem, just stupid and ridiculous.
Yeah. Oh, I can take this one. I remember one, it was the Red Flag Act. And
Okay.
bear with me here for a second. This act, introduced in Britain in the 1860s, technically introduced the world's first speed limit on the road. Okay. That speed limit was a whopping 4 miles an hour in the country. Ooh. And even less, 2 miles per hour in the town. Now, remember, this is during the time when horse-drawn carriages were the most quote-unquote efficient way to get around. But once cars came along some 30 years later, the ridiculousness of a 4 mile per hour speed limit was recognized and then repealed. They got rid of that Red Flag Act.
Yeah, and I think there was at one point, I don't know if it was through the whole thing, the whole duration of the act, but I had heard something that somebody had to be walking in front of your car carrying a red flag, which kind of makes sense with the 4 mile per hour. Isn't that about walking speed, or like a higher end of walking
something
speed?
Like that? It's not very fast.
So I wonder if that's when people say that's a red flag. I wonder if it's a nod to that law. Maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, I also read about one in South Carolina that required, and I'm going to read this verbatim from the source that I found it from.
Awesome.
It said, when approaching a four-way or blind intersection in a non-horse driven vehicle, you must stop 100 feet from the intersection and discharge a firearm into the air to warn horse traffic.
So I guess everyone had to own a gun in order to own a car at that point. So talk about stupid laws in hindsight.
Yeah, well, I mean, South Carolina, I won't go too far down that road, but it might be required to own a gun in South Carolina. I'm not sure. Anyway, so the point, let's get back on track here, Rachel. So the point is that I think that the privacy industry, in a lot of ways, it's in its infancy. So much like those early days of the automotive industry. So the laws intend to protect things as they were, in that case, like horses and pedestrians, rather than what it could be, which was an evolution into an infrastructure to accommodate widespread use of fast-moving cars, which is what it became, soon after that. And so much like that, the privacy laws today are focused on how things are done from a data and data use perspective, and not really looking at how data practices will evolve and change, which they're certainly going to.
Yeah, agree with that. But I mean, it sounds like you want us to predict the future then.
I would love to. And I'll say that one of my favorite podcasts is Stuff You Should Know. I think it's from iHeartRadio. And so shout out to Josh and Chuck, who are the producers of that, or they might not be, they're the people on it who are speaking.
Yeah.
And they have a thing that they call a Wayback Machine to bring their audiences back into the past. So maybe if we're going to talk about the future, we need to something like that to bring our audiences to the future with us.
I don't know Josh and Clark as well as you do, but I'm sure their budget is far greater than ours. It can't be anywhere like ours.
Yeah. There's no budget. Okay, so no DeLoreans or flux capacitors for us for this.
Yeah. Well, where would we go then if you could take us to the future in this hypothetical example?
Yeah. So again, get back on track here again. So I can't really predict the future, but I don't think we would have to go that far. The amount of change that we're going to see over the next decade or two, I think is going to be far greater than the changes that we saw over the past few decades. And that was huge. Like, just in the past couple of decades, there's like the invention of the iPhone, for example, changed so many things about how we live our lives. So like if this transformation happens, I think that the point that I'm getting to is we should avoid doing anything with our privacy laws that might restrict like really good, beneficial, exciting opportunities for us as a society.
Agreed. I'm all for innovation first too. And it kind of makes me think about how AI and machine learning, albeit buzzwords today, it kind of evolved our society and really changed the way we thought about prediction capabilities by having so much data informed by our observations on huge data sets. Fun fact, AI and machine learning, like the capabilities and the foundations themselves that we're realizing today were proposed decades ago. Some models even as far back as the invention of the modern computers. And it was just about having those actual computing and processing capabilities and a means to implement what had been envisioned.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's the changes that I'm talking about, I think are really going to be realized because of AI and ML and everything that goes with it. So that, to kind of, try to explain the point that I wanted to get here, let me offer a hypothetical that I think today is probably not that far-fetched given the possibilities of AI and machine learning. So we have to look at an individual person for this. So I'm going to use a made-up person and let's call them Sam. And unfortunately, poor Sam died last week of heart disease. But let's assume that Sam wasn't good at routine well visits, for example. So they didn't go to their doctor at all. And they really only went a few months ago because they had chest pains. Their diagnosis came late in the progression of their disease. But if you go back in Sam's life, you might be able to look at some data points that could be relevant to Sam's eventual death.
Yeah, well, first off, poor Sam. But it sounds like we really need that Wayback Machine for him now.
Yeah, so true. We're not going to the future. We're going back into Sam's past. So here's some data sources that I think could be relevant to Sam's heart disease, but only if you look at them together. So here's some examples. So Sam might have been using one of those sleep apps that you connect something to yourself that keeps track of, I don't know, how you're sleeping. I used one briefly, but I don't know them very well. But anyway, so it might have noticed a change in Sam's sleep patterns. Separately, they may have started to feel a little bit out of sorts and going to, CVS or Walgreens or something and buying Tylenol or some herbal remedies or something like that. So it was a change in their behavior. And that would have been captured on their pharmacy's loyalty program. We swipe those cards or whatever we think to get discounts, but we're giving away our data. They might, for example, have reduced the frequency of going to the gym because they weren't feeling well, which would be captured on their gym's membership sign-in database. They might have searched the symptoms that they were having online, which would be captured
anyone?
by Exactly, yeah. So their web search history would have something like that. Even at work, like their pattern of sick days might have changed, and they're now taking more sick days off, or they're not always on Fridays when people aren't always really sick. So just there's different sources of data.
Yeah, and I'm thinking another one could be one of those DNA testing programs that, among many other data points, can tell you and may have, in Sam's case, predict a higher than normal risk of heart disease based on his genes.
I love it. Yeah. So exactly. But individually, if you look at each one of those data points, it really doesn't tell us anything about Sam. But when we look at them together, it really could tell the story about what's going to happen to Sam. So, and conceptually, this is my idea, a machine learning model will be able to ingest all of those data points and really look for the patterns that are within them.
Yeah, and I have many questions about machine learning models, ingesting all that data. My privacy center of my brain is like on fire. But before we get into that, how would it help Sam if a machine learning model had all of this data in your hypothetical?
Yeah, so unfortunately for poor Sam, it wouldn't.
Too late.
But it's too late for Sam. So, but here's the reality: the same ML models that have the data about Sam could look for the same patterns in other people's data in, across the public. And so a recurrence of the data patterns that were the same as what happened to Sam could be an early warning about the possibilities of heart disease, for example. And, don't at me on, any of our listeners. I don't know anything about heart disease. It's just kind of an example.
Yeah.
But if we were to give that pattern to either the person who has a similar pattern or their healthcare providers, really all we need them to do is go to the doctor and have the tests done that would actually show if there's heart disease. And like over time, a model like this could learn, because some of the patterns are going to predict something and it's not going to be correct. But you feed that back into the model and it's going to learn over time and become more precise so that future pattern predictions are better and more accurate.
Yeah. So, I mean, so it must be using, in this case, information from a pretty large population of people, right?
It is, but it's kind of a weird way of looking at large populations of data. So there's exceptions in a lot of privacy laws that allow for personal data to be used for public health research. But generally, the uses of that data are the data is de-identified or anonymized, and it's used to help in studies about larger populations by epidemiologists and virologists and other stuff like that. But you're not looking at it. You're looking at data from a lot of people, but not about individual people. It is kind of large populations.
Yeah, it seems similar to some of those studies that were performed real time in response to even COVID-19, which was not that long ago.
It wasn't, and actually, when that all happened, at the time, I worked for the School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins University, and did I think we call them cybersecurity. They were essentially privacy impact studies of research studies. So it was actually interesting to see some of those things. So yeah, that's exactly what it is. But for a study, those larger studies, it really doesn't matter who the individuals are that the data are coming from. They just have to have data on a lot of people. And sometimes they need to know like characteristics about the people, like what their gender and race and age and stuff like that. But it doesn't need to be identifiable back to an individual person. So, but what I'm proposing here is like a broad study of identifiable data about individual people. And it would have to be identifiable data and track back to individual people so that you could match it with other data about the same people. So if you anonymize it, I can't compare the CVS record to your sleep app. Mm-hmm. I need to know that both of those are from you. And like using the example of the large populations that we talked about, the sleep app data just wouldn't be useful if it was generalized to say that, X% of the population is sleeping less in March, right? It's not helpful for what I'm talking about here. We need to know specifically that Sam was sleeping less starting on this date and what those patterns were for that one person.
Yeah, so you have to be able to link it back to the same individuals. Who the individuals are don't matter. And in this case, that would be Sam from those very sources.
Exactly. And then you do the same thing over and over again for the whole population, or at least the size of the population that you have access to the data for.
Yeah, got it. Let's go back to the machine learning models in their ingestion, because I still have concerns there. Do we really want all that data to be about us to be broadly available, even if it is maybe de-anonymized in some partial way?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. We don't, because that's the fear. And it really has to not be anonymized or de-identified. So it has to be identifiable data. So we don't want that just kind of out there. But I think that's where I'm going. That's where we come in and our industry comes in. So we have a responsibility to write policies and designing programs and implementing controls, educating the population to allow for something like this.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot. I mean, from all parties. Would this be possible?
It's possible. I think that the the thing that's in the way is our own mindset, how we think about these data sets that are about us. Like right now, I think most of us default to thinking that the data that is about us is owned by the companies that collect it and control it. And like we do, like there's privacy laws that impose rules on them about how they do that. But like we really think of the data as being theirs. Like if I have a Twitter account, then Twitter owns the data about me, and we hope they follow the rules about how to manage that.
Mhm.
Instead, I think that we should own our personal data as our property. We should think of it as our property, and that we keep ownership of it, and then we allow those companies who collect it to use it in ways that are both regulated and we should know what they're doing with it. And I don't think it's a huge change from what's happening today, but the mindset behind it would really need an evolution. That's retention of ownership. I think it'd be kind of like the banks, like when our relationship with our banks and financial institutions.
Yeah, when you put money in a bank, you still own it, but the bank manages it for you while they have it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So how would that translate to data management then in your case?
So I think the start of this framework that I'm talking about is it's already starting to emerge. So we already have common restrictions for companies about when they can collect data about people.
Yeah, I guess we are heading in that direction. I mean, principles like collection limitation, and that's
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's also rules about what types of data the companies can collect.
yeah, for purpose specification.
Right. And then like even how the data gets used once they've collected it. So there's
Use
rules about that.
limitation.
Exactly. Use limitations. Right.
So what, going back to the changes you're proposing, what are, there have to be changes here.
So I think the shift in thinking is like from they own the data to it belongs to us is kind of the first step to that. The driver of the current uses of our data are the companies collected. So they do ask us for permission. They don't want to, they do it because they have to. And they probably push it to the limits of what data that they do collect about us, about us and store. And then they'll take that data and they'll enter it into contracts with other companies and share it with them. And I'm sure that we've agreed to that because it's buried in the fine print of these
Terms of service.
right, exactly. So instead we should be the drivers about what's happening to our data. We should have the right to, and I think this is the big change, to instruct companies that have our data to grant access to who we want them to have access to, and beyond who they want to have access to the data. We should have greater access to our data and control over it. But I just want to point out here that there has to be balancing as part of the title here, because it's really, really expensive to collect and process all of this data. And the companies that are doing it have spent a huge amount of money in doing it. Now, they also make a huge amount of money, but we do want the data to be collected, because we can't have these outcomes like predicting when somebody's going to have heart disease without the data being there. So the companies that are collecting the data, they have to be able to make money. So, it's not just a case of like, we need to shut it down and they're not going to be able to use our data to send ads to us, for example, because what's in it for them? So we have to balance between controls and ownership for us, but they're putting in all of the work to collect the data. They need something too.
Absolutely. And I think to the point of, in the world of personalized advertising, I think, yes, protecting yourself in the privacy sense traditionally is very important, but that component, this imbalance of kind of control and power that ends up being in the form of money in what you can do with individuals' data tends to be as much of the problem as anything, even if, you know, it's not explicitly about socials being shared or, you know, your phone number being leaked. It feels weird. Like, it's my data. I should be able to benefit from it. And perhaps I like to think future looking, that message and, you know, your sentiment here will resonate as much as any with a population that's becoming increasingly more tech savvy and
Yeah.
conscious of how much data is generated, how it's generated, and the way that it's just capturing every activity around them. We will need to figure out how to get consumers, I think, to engage in a way that is less time and labor intensive, as
Yeah.
reading those hundreds of terms of service agreements we probably have seen and checked off in our lives, and then a step further, taking action against that and participating in this.
Yeah, agreed. And I think like we're never going to get people to read those terms of service agreements. So there's, and you and I have talked about this I think on a previous episode about the need to simplify those some. But you know, it can be easier. And like one of the things I'm proposing is that, let's say, for example, I have a gym membership, and obviously they've got records about all my workouts and my goals and my weights and my patterns and stuff like that. And when I join a different gym, I should be able to instruct my old gym to transfer my records. It's data that's about me. It belongs to me, to transfer that to my new gym. Really, in the same way that that happens in the medical industry. Like if I go to a new doctor, I can tell my old doctor to transfer my records over, and that's kind of a norm. Or, and I think this is the part that I think is really new, is I should be able to sign up for some sort of a centralized service that just routinely reaches out to all of these places that have data about me, and they collect it and process it and store it for me on my behalf. Like
Yeah,
I'm the customer.
it's funny you mentioned that, because that it reminds me of one of the early cells of blockchain technology. And by early, I mean like maybe 10 years ago, I was reading about this, where a theoretical selling point was in the healthcare application that you were mentioning.
Yeah.
In theory, healthcare data could become, now maybe not decentralized, but or centralized, but decentralized, in the sense that it would follow each patient, your little ledger of, you know, various healthcare information between you and each of your providers as you move from your dermatologist to your GP to whoever. And that blockchain ledger would leave a continuous record of who had access to it and where the data's been and what's happened to it. So it sounds a lot like what you're picturing here, and I'm surprised I haven't seen it before.
Yeah, I don't, as I was thinking about this and preparing for this episode, for this chat, I don't think, I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but yeah, it's something like that. A company that serves as a central repository for all of the data about me, ingesting it from all of the companies that have data about me. But I would be the customer and have control of it.
There's something in the way, because, you know, we're saying we don't think it's a thing here yet. It's either a business contract thing, who's making money where and when, maybe that hasn't been sold yet.
Right. I mean, did we just invent something here?
If we can figure out the details, we might as well just go to Shark Tank and they'll realize their vision, maybe.
All right. So, but you know, ultimately though, if something like that existed, or you know, maybe somebody listening will go out and roll with it. But my vision there of connecting the dots between all of those different data sources would be realized. But right now, everyone who has data, including us, we're holding on to it and not sharing it or allowing other people to see into it. And you know, in some ways, it might be like a heresy for me as a privacy professional to be suggesting, you know, breaking open the barn doors and letting the data be out there. But you know, I think there's times when that would be a better approach. We just need to manage it, and that's our responsibility.
Going to the balancing act title that you mentioned for this episode.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think a lot of people don't pay attention to their data and the privacy implications of it. We just click on those, agree to the terms of service. We accept the free use of apps and social media because, you know, just the cost of it's a few targeted ads. But we also should harness the power of our data so that it can benefit us and not just the companies that are collecting it.
Yeah,
about us, I guess.
It is extremely valuable. It's today's gold, and it's kind of still a new frontier. That said, it sounds that much more challenging. But
Yeah.
again, to the point of innovation earlier, never say never. That's how we move forward. How do you propose we get there?
I don't know. I mean, hey, I have the ideas. Other people can do it. So I don't know. Maybe these conversations that we have are part of it. Like, we need to evangelize for change and encourage people to get more involved with their data and kind of get people to realize there's more out there. Like,
Yeah.
we don't have to drive our car at 4 miles per hour. There's
collective
more
action, right? We can
Right.
all say this is stupid, a grassroots movement of sorts.
Exactly. And hey, right here, it started here, right here between you and me.
Absolutely. This was a fascinating perspective. Thanks for sharing your thoughts about this, and a lot of it resonated. I just hope you don't get us kicked out of the Privacy Club with some of these snippets being taken out of context. Looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, me too. And just before we wrap, we have been encouraged to say repeatedly that the information that we share throughout this episode is that of our own, and it's not in any way affiliated with our employers or other organizations. These episodes are produced on our own time, and they're based on our own research that we do on our own internet that everyone has, and our own professional opinions.
Thanks, John. And thanks for everyone for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode.
See you soon.